Hey, what's going on, guys? Phil here. So, today, the upcoming February balance patch was announced for Hearthstone, and I wanted to give my thoughts and opinions on the five cards which are being changed. Typically, in Hearthstone, I don't have that much criticism of nerfs. This batch of nerfs feels very different compared to many nerfs of the past, though. I think on average, the Hearthstone team does a fairly good job at nerfing problem cards as they come up, as well as preemptively nerfing cards which don't seem out of place in the current metagame, but in some point in the future have different implications. So a good example of that would be the Hex nerf. Back when it used to cost 3, it went up to 4, which always felt, kind of like it should cost 4, because that's kind of what polymorph is. It never really made sense why Hex costed less. So, those kind of changes they've always been pretty good about. Um, and on that note, one of the utility ones that they've done in the past was nerfing Hunter's Mark from 0 to 1, which is pretty topical now that Hunter's Mark is now being nerfed from 1 to 2. But that past nerf to Hunter's Mark I thought was also a good example of, their willingness to change cards that aren't actually super impactful in the current metagame, but just seem kind of unfair. Um, with that being said, I have a big issue with this upcoming set of nerfs. So with that being said, we're just gonna get into it. They're changing five cards, and four of them are basic or classic set cards. I don't have a very distinct opinion on the Evergreen set, as many like streamers, YouTubers, Reddit communities do. Um, but it's always interesting to see that they're nerfing classic and basic cards instead of cards from expansions. Um, I don't think that it's anything super malicious. I don't think that they specifically nerf evergreen sets so that you have to buy new card packs, anything like that. That some of the like Reddit conspiracy theorists will make you think. Um, but it is interesting to note because it means going forward, maybe not this year, but next year, maybe not this next patch, but next patch after that, sometime in the future, I do expect that the Evergreen set will get addressed in a more full way. I feel like this is them nerfing all these basic cards is just kind of a precursor to eventually changing the system. Because I really like the outlook that Brian Kibler has on the situation, where the Evergreen set was a great idea in theory, um, but the game has evolved in the past 6 years since it's been out to a point where the cards that were created 6 years ago to be balanced are no longer in the same like realm that they were in back then. There's a lot of stuff surrounding them, supporting them now, where there's definitely arguments to change how the system currently works. So, with all that being said at the beginning, let's get into the actual nerfs themselves. We're going to start with the most egregious of all of them, which many people will probably think is equality, since it got hit the hardest, going up by 2 mana instead of 1 mana like every other card. But the worst nerf in this set is Cold Blood. Cold Blood in the past has been used for Miracle Rogue, so this is a card that throughout the history of Hearthstone has been like a problem card, like problem card. That being that it's in many decks which have been seen as like meta breaking or kind of degenerate. So like the original Miracle Rogue, basically any Miracle Rogue variant, um, and it's been a staple in aggro rogue. But with the introduction of Baku and Gen to create odd and even decks, Cold Blood strength has been amplified by a ton. Basically, it's just too heavy a hitter in odd rogue. Um, with that being said, I think that just nerfing the cost is not what I would have done to this card. I think you would have had to change some of the text around somehow. I don't have a very elegant nerf, but you could have kind of just made it like a Blessing of Might, like a Blessing of Might that requires combo. Like, obviously, that's a worse card, but it could still be 1 mana and put into that odd rogue deck. With Cold Blood being at 2 mana, not only can it not be run in Odd Rogue, which means that if you're going to be running Cold Blood at all, which you're not because the nerf completely kills the card, but if you were going to run it, you now have to do like even rogue or just straight tempo rogue. But if you're doing tempo rogue, then you're playing Keliseth, so it's only good in even minion based rogue, which does not exist and will most likely not exist for quite a long time. In principle, though, like Cold Blood now costing 2 to combo give +4 attack means that it's just a purely worse Eviscerate, because it has the same text essentially as Eviscerate of deal 2 or deal 4, except it has to be placed on a minion. It's much less effective when comboed because giving +2 attack versus deal 2 damage is like half of a mana worth of an effect versus like a 2 mana effect. Um, and Eviscerate can be affected by spell damage. It can be affected by going through taunt. Um, it can hit whatever you want. It can hit face more often than a minion will be able to hit face. So Cold Blood just becoming a strictly on minion Eviscerate is a lot worse. Obviously, it's still decent if if your minion sticks, but um, it being nerfed to 2 mana means that its combo potential is essentially dead. So in Miracle Rogue, you can no longer do Leroy Cold Blood, which was one of its main win conditions back when it really was a deck. As of right now, it doesn't really exist as a deck, but Cold Blood was still run even in the like meme versions of Miracle Rogue. Um, so Cold Blood's completely dead. There's no reason to ever run this card over Eviscerate unless you're specifically going for like Wind Fury Rogue or something just stupid. Like obviously there's situations where a Cold Blood will still be useful. If it sticks on a minion, that's cool. You get to get the recursion of that damage. But if you're putting a Cold Blood onto a minion, that makes it a giant threat. So it's gonna most likely be killed all the time, which means that your Cold Blood was an Eviscerate. Um, so I see no reason to ever run this card ever again. Cold Blood is completely dead. Moving on, we'll go to Equality. Equality going from 2 to 4 is eh. I feel like it looks very jarring, and it is very jarring. Equality being at 2 to combo with Pyromancer and Equality, or Pyromancer and Consecration, that's been in the game since day one. Equality being nerfed to such a degree as it is kind of goes back to the Druid nerfs, where they were nerfing the classic and basic set cards. Where my standpoint was, if the cards have been in the game since the beginning and haven't been broken up until now, that means that they were actually very balanced and should not have been the cards which got hit with nerfs. That's essentially what I think about Equality too. Up until this expansion, like any controlling based Paladin deck is centered around Equality. Um, it is the only clear that Paladin has, aside from like I guess Shrink Ray. Now that it costs only one more than Equality, but the fact that you were able to leverage Paladin's not superb early game in combo and control decks by being able to come back on turns 4 or 6 with Equality Pyro, Equality Consecrate, that was what your entire game plan was based on. And nerfing that to a 6 and 8 mana clear instead of a 2 or instead of a 4 and 6 mana clear is huge. That's 2 extra turns of pressure for an aggressive deck. That means that turns where you're clearing and then clearing and then developing your board have become a lot weaker because you're not going to have as much mana to use. And 4 mana is just really expensive for this effect, especially considering that Shrink Ray does essentially the same thing for 5. And Shrink Ray now becomes a much more enticing option. Cool. Shrink Ray is a very interesting card, but this is the only nerf that I've ever seen that kind of defines to me that Baku and Gen might be a problem. Um, Reddit will always tell you that Baku and Gen are an issue, that it's an awful design, that the fact that it encourages such linear deck building is really bad, upgraded hero powers are too strong, blah blah blah. And some of those points have merit, some of them don't. That's a talk for a different time. But Equality would be fine at 2 for the rest of Hearthstone's career. It'd be pretty good still at 3. but you can't put it to 3 because otherwise Odd Paladin gets access to it, which is way too powerful. So it had to go to 4 if you were going to be nerfing Equality's cost. And there's no way you're going to be nerfing its effect. Its effect is too unique. So if you're going to do a nerf to Equality, this is kind of where you have to go with it. Um, but it feels really bad. Uh, the I don't think Equality deserved a nerf. Paladin, like combo Exodia, is very prevalent right now, but it's not so prevalent that it needed this hard of a hit. Especially because in this same nerf set, you're nerfing Hunter twice, and you're also nerfing even Shaman, I guess, whatever. But with those nerfs, it means Hunter's going to be a little bit less popular because it's going to be a little bit slower, which means that more aggressive decks might be able to come out of the woodworks and shine again. Stuff like Odd Rogue, and maybe, who knows, maybe Zoo. Especially now that Paladin lost its really early clears, these early minion-based decks can kind of come back into the meta, which is a good thing. Um, but I think as soon as these OTK Paladins disappear or fall out of favor, everyone's going to be missing this 2 mana equality. Um, I think that the biggest thing going forward with nerfs that should be like in the forefront of designers' minds is the fact that if classic and basic cards have been in the game since day one and have never, they've always been prevalent, which is fine. That's kind of the point of them. It's so that you always have a base set of cards which are decent, so that if you come back from a long hiatus, you at least know some of the cards and can try and build a deck around them. Um, those cards should not be the cards that you hit with these extreme nerfs. So that goes back to the Druid nerfs last time. It goes to equality. Um, I kind of am just repeating myself, but I wish I had better words to describe my feeling that if a card has been in the game since day one, has never been broken, and it, especially with equality, it influences so many, like, there's so many cards that synergize with it that make Paladin the control class that it is. It's the only legs control Paladin has. Like, there there is not going to be a control Paladin after this goes away. At least for, I don't, I would bet, like, I could eat a shoe on stream if control Paladin still becomes a thing after this equality hit. Because there is no way that this equality hit is not going to completely gut Paladin in any control sense. Um, it slows it down by so much, and equality is such an interesting card too. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because back in like classic and beta, my favorite class is Paladin, but there's so much history to this card, and it is like the defining card of this entire class. I don't think there's a more Paladin card than equality, and seeing it get nerfed in such an egregious way is just awful. So hopefully when eventually the Hearthstone team has to reevaluate their decision on the core set, um, depending on what they do, maybe we'll see equality get unnerved. Maybe all the classic cards will get unnerved and rotated or something like that, like they did with Molten Giant. But this is just the worst nerf that I think I've seen in the history of Hearthstone, to be completely frank. Um, moving on from that point, Flame Tongue Totem going from 2 to 3. It sucks. Even Shaman is an interesting deck. I don't know why, if even Shaman is not very prevalent right now, because it's definitely like tier 3, why it's getting nerfed, especially because it promotes Baku and Gen decks, which they obviously want to promote because it was the two big legendaries from Witchwood. So I have no idea why Flame Tongue got the axe. Even in a non-even Shaman Shell, it was like decent card that you could consider running. Um, it had some interesting late game implications with stuff like Alakir on the same turn, so you can get a lot of burst damage in if you're more of a tokeny deck like that. And it just enables a lot of token strategies which don't exist right now. Token decks are not prevalent. Bloodlust and Flametongue have been like the only support for that archetype since forever. So I don't really know why this got nerfed. The only thing I can think of is with Thunderhead and Voltaic Rush, which summon the 1/1 Sparks. Um, with the next expansion, or with the rotation, or with both, that's how that works. Um, maybe they put so much overload synergy into the upcoming set that having Flame Tongue cost 2 and then Thunderhead and Voltaic Rush synergy, maybe that's too good. But that is the only consideration I can see for nerfing Flame Tongue right now. Even Shaman tier 3 doesn't matter, and Flame Tongue again has been in the game since day one. It's just a strong strong basic card, and I don't feel like those should be the cards that are getting the axe. Hunter's Mark going from 1 to 2. This is kind of like the Execute nerf, where Execute went from 1 to 2. It seems really bad. It seems like you're never going to want to play the card ever again. Turns out you're probably going to want to play the card again. There's not a lot to say. There's going to be some decks that are still going to run Hunter's Mark. I I don't see Hunter's Mark as being an effect that ever goes away. It's still better because a lot of the time you're using Hunter's Mark to get through like a big taunt if you're playing Hunter. So 2 mana Hunter's Mark is still better than running like an Ironbeak Owl, just because it's a lot more flexible than a 3 mana 2/1. Um, and its effect cool. So I'm fine with this nerf. I don't think it had to happen, but I'm not too sad to see it happen. And then for Spellstone going from 5 to 6, that is interesting. It makes all of the current Spellstone centric Hunter decks a little bit slower, which is good. It opens up more of that early game aspect that we were talking about with equality. So more minion aggressive based strategies can try and come back into the meta. That's cool. I'm not an aggro player, but it'll be interesting to see how this affects the meta and what kind of decks can kind of pop out now that clears and like massive threats are going to be a little bit slower. Um, Aside from that, I haven't done any theory crafting, but there's theory crafting going around about even Hunter, even Secret Hunter, so that might become a thing. It seems really bad because you're going like turn 1 hero power, turn 2 secret, turn 2 secret, turn 2 secret, turn 3 secret hero power, and like, eh, that seems okay, but I don't know. That's an interesting concept that might see some experimentation. All of the current decks that run Spellstone, this doesn't impact that much. It just makes them a little slower. I don't see that killing them off, so Hunter will still remain one of, if not the best class in the game. Um, so yeah, with that said, final roundup of this set of nerfs. Flame Tongue, no reason to get nerfed. This has to be future proofing. I don't understand how this can't be future proofing. Hunter's Mark, just one of their utility nerfs. Again, right now it's not that oppressive. Maybe it became too oppressive, kind of like how Hex was not that important, and then the nerf to 4 just kind of made sense. Um, Spellstone makes it slower. That's pretty easy. Spellstone definitely deserved a nerf, and I'm glad that they kind of went with something this marginal. It definitely helps bring out more aggressive strategies so that they don't have to deal with that as early. But it doesn't kill off any of the current Hunter archetypes which run Spellstone, and it opens up creative design space for the even Secret Hunter, so that's cool. Cold Blood is gutted. You're never going to play Cold Blood ever again. And as for equality, this is, in my opinion, the worst nerf that Hearthstone has ever seen. I don't think there is any possible way that Control Paladin, at least until rotation, is going to be viable. Exodia, Shrivala, OTK, both of those decks are going to die on the spot, which opens up a lot of design space for, the last 2 or 3 months of this expansion cycle. But in the future, this is going to be very detrimental to Paladin as a class, and if there was any possible way that myself or the community had any say in nerfs or reverting nerfs, this I would use my golden ticket to the chocolate factory to unnerf equality, because this is going to completely kill one of my favorite archetypes in all of Hearthstone and all of Hearthstone history. So yeah, if I'm fully willing, if Control Paladin remains tier 1 or tier 2 after this equality nerf hits and before rotation, so in the period between this nerf and the next set, if Control Paladin is tier 1 or tier 2, I will like eat a chocolate boot or something, because there's no way this is ever going to happen. So yeah, thank you guys for checking out the video. Make sure to like the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Discord down in the description below. Let me know what you guys think about the nerfs. Hit me up on Discord. I do coaching, stuff like that. So yeah, I will see you guys next time, and Rip Paladin.